Hi, you're welcome to today's episode. Today we'll be looking at while loop. While loop. So we'll be starting a series on loops. So we'll look at while loop, for loop, switch. All right. So but today we'll be looking at while and do while loop. Please, if you have not followed my channel, please like and follow the channel, please. Please subscribe. Subscribe. And if you have not seen previous videos, please do well to go back and see them, understand them, so that you won't be lost in between. It's good to have a hands-on experience. So while you are watching, ensure you are coding along. If you have any question, please drop it in the comment section and I will answer you accordingly. So today we'll be looking at while loop. Most times, we often want to repeat an action or some actions over and over again in the course of our program. Okay? For example, you want to output a good from a list of another goods, or you want to output a number from a list of like 10 or 20 numbers, or you want a user to enter in the correct code. If it enters a wrong code, it should keep on displaying invalid code, invalid code till the right code is entered. These are some of the examples of loops while coding. Okay, so now let's look at a while loop. While loop has the following syntax. A while loop has the following syntax. So this is the syntax of while loop. You say while condition, if its condition is true, execute whatever is found inside this block of code. That's the syntax. So if this condition, until this condition is met, keep on executing what's inside here. All right. So that's an example. That's the syntax. Sorry. Now let's take an example of what we meant by this. Let's say we have a simple example. Let I is assigned 0, for example. Sorry, this is I. So I could say while I is less than what? 5. Alert what? Alert I. Then increment I. Please, if you don't understand what this increment means, if you don't understand what this increment does, please go back to our operator class, the class where we talked about operators. Go back and understand it very well, so you understand what the increment is doing. All right. So now let's run this code and see what we have. So this page says 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see it stopped at 4. Why? Because 4 is less than what? 5. If I should make it less than or equal to 5, so you see that it will display what? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 before the code ends. Okay? So I'll just take this thing up here. So this is a simple example of how while loop works. Okay? So like I said, it's a loop that iterates over and over again until a condition is met before the loop terminates. Okay? Then we also have a do while loop. We also have a do while loop. Although do while loop is not really um, used often, but at least it's okay, you know what it does. So in other words, how does do while loop works? So let's see. Do while loop, just let's initialize our variable to 0. Then we say do this block of code. So alert I, okay, alert I, then run this code while I is less than 3. So it will keep on doing this until I is less than what? 3. Okay, to keep on alerting this until I is less than 3. So if we should run this now, let's see what we have. 0. Alright, so you see 1, 2, 3, 2, and that's the end of this. So you have the option to use the do while loop or while loop. So let's take an example of while loop, practical examples. So we can say let's sum is assigned 0. Then we can say let's num is assigned prompt. Prompt enter a number. Okay. Now because prompt displays or output a string, so we need to convert prompt to number. So we would use we can use plus or use parse int. So let's use parse int. prompt. So we say y number, y num is greater than or equal 0. We should have a sum plus num. Please, if you don't understand these operators, please go back to my video on operators. Go back to my video on operators and you see how what this thing means, what this operators means. Okay? So we need to take the number again. So say num, let's assign another value again, pass int, prompt, enter a number. Alright? So we can actually alert or document the number. So let's alert and see. Alert. Let's use a backtick. Let's go back to my videos of string to understand backticks. So the sum is num. Or let's use sum, because that is sum of what we have here. So that's what we have. So I enter a number. Let's enter 2, another number, 4, 5, 6, 7, 5, 8, 9, 0. So whether a minus number, let's say minus 1. Alright? So until the number, is what's greater or less than 0. And the number is less than 0 before it will stop. Okay? So you see, at this point here, we initialize sum, then we converted our prompt because it gives a string. Alright, so while this is true, you should always add the numbers to the previous sum. Alright, then it will repeat it until this is false. Then you can now what? It can now display the output. Alright, so that is an example of a while loop. That's an example of a while loop. That's an example of while loop. If you have any question, please don't forget to leave it in the comment section below. Then now let's go back to for loop. For loop is a bit more complex, but is almost the most common loop that is used when working. Is the commonest loop that is used when working. So now let's say syntax of a for loop. For loop. So this is syntax of a for loop. So it has a begin, it has a condition, then it has an increment. A begin, a condition, and an increment. So if this condition is not met, it increments the value and executes the block of code. So this repeats itself until the condition is what? Met. So let's take an example. So now let's take a simple example of a for loop. So let's make this index 0. Let's say index. Let's use 4. Okay. Then let's alert index. Okay. 0, 1, 2, 3 to stop. Okay. So we are saying this initialization is at 0. So when this condition is met, if it is met, is it met? No, because 0 is less than 4. Yes, 0 is less than 4, right? So it will increase 0 to 1. Alert is value. Goes back again until it meets a number that is not less than 4. 4 is not less than 4, right? It will what? Terminate the program. Okay? So that's how a loop works. Okay? That's how a loop works. There are times when you skip the first part. There are times when you skip the last part. So it all depends on the kind of loop you are trying to create. Okay? It all depends on the kind of loop you are trying to create. Let's take more examples and see. For example, now, normally a loop exists when its condition becomes false. Okay? But we can force the exit at any time using a special break directive. All right? There are times when you just want to end a loop forcefully. How do we mean? Now, take this example. Now, look at this example. Let sum is assigned 0, y, we're using our while loop now, y true, let value okay, is assigned what? Let's use our plus. We can use it. We can use our past int. Let's use our plus. Enter a number. So now watch what happens here. So I can now say if not value, then what should happen? Break. Else the loop should what? Continue and add the previous value to a new one. Then finally alerts the output sum. All right. Now what happens here? This break directive here is activated. Okay. If the user enters an empty line or cancels the input, it stops the loop immediately, then passes the control to the first line after the loop, which is this loop here, alerts. Are you following now? Now let's see what we have. Enter a number. It keep on entering a number. But if I don't enter a number, it sums and ends the loop. That's because of that break. All right. So there are times when you want to force a loop to end. So you use what? Break. All right. Then we also have another condition too, which is the continue directive. This directive is a lighter version of break. So it doesn't stop the whole loop. Instead, what it does is that it stops the current iteration and forces the loop to start a new one. All right. It doesn't stop the current. Sorry, it doesn't stop the whole loop, but it stops the current iteration and then what forces the loop to do what now? To start a new one if the condition allows it. Let's take an example of that and let's see so you understand what we're talking about. So we can say for let I is assigned 0, which is to initialize. Okay, then we'll have a condition which is less than I is less than 10. Okay, then if it's true, we increment what? I. Okay, then we'll say if I modulus 2 will give us what is equal to 0. What happens? Continue. Okay, otherwise alert I. This is a simple for loop that displays odd numbers. For even values of I, the continue directive stops executing the body and passes control to the next iteration of the for loop. All right, so that the alert will now finally display the odd values. Do you understand now? Now let's see what we have. So we have 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 to end, because the condition has what? Been met, which is this condition. All right. So it continues. This is what the continue um, directive does. Okay. So please understand the difference between continue and break directive. Okay. The continue directive does not actually um, end the whole loop. Rather, what happens is what? It stops the it's it stops the current iteration and forces the loop to start a new one. All right, so that's the difference between current, that's between continue and what? Break. While break ends the loop entirely. Okay, so please watch this video again and get a good understanding of what I'm saying, so you can understand how to use loop. You can't do without loop. Loop is an essential factor or block of code while you are programming. Okay, so note, to make an infinite loop, usually the while construct is used. Okay, but you can stop an infinite loop using what? The break directive. Okay, if we don't want to do anything in the current iteration and we would like to forward to the next one, what you can do, you can use the continue directive. All right, so please take note of this. Okay, so now let's look at what's the difference between a while loop and a for loop. The difference between these two loops is how they decide to stop looping. That's the difference. You see, for a for loop, the for loop has a specific and a predefined number of iteration that it will make. All right. We know how many times a for loop will iterate once the code is running, and the JavaScript engine starts executing for a log for loop code. We know how many times to iterate. But this is a bit different for a while loop. The while loop keeps looping while the condition remains true. Once the condition evaluates to false, then the whole loop stops totally. All right. So that's one of the reason. Oh, sorry, that's one of the difference between a while loop and a for loop. Now let's look at the pros and cons of the while loop. The only con that we can talk about here is that it can run forever. So if you're in a situation where your while loop keeps looping to infinity, what happens? Then your program is stuck and you will need to shut down your browser to terminate the running of the program. And this is not good at all. Okay? So it's always good that a programmer makes sure that while loop's condition will at some point evaluate to false. All right? That is what a good programmer does. He ensures that the while loop does what? Evaluate to false at some point. So you need to remember, so what you need to remember is that you need to always make sure that your condition will eventually evaluate to false. So that's one rule you need to understand, that your condition will eventually evaluate towards false. Then the pros for while loop is that the loop will continually run until such time that the condition evaluates to false is very useful. An example would be asking a user for input again and again until they provide a valid input. See that now? This is a valid example. So the user will continue to enter the input over and over again until he or she enters the right input before it stops or executes. Okay? Now let's take another example again. A simple example of a while loop. Let's take a simple example of a while loop. So let's say age is assigned what? 18. Okay? Now, watch you. Now let's say let user is assigned a value, because we are getting input, so we convert it to what? To number, right? So we can use pass int or plus prompt the user. Let's say prompt enter your valid age. Okay. Now we want to run this thing and check. While this is true, okay, while this condition is true, all right, if the user, all right, enters a number that is less than 18, which is age, okay, or the user enter a wrong number, which is not number. Let's use is not a number. Okay. What should happen? Let's change the prompt of the user. Let's say prompt the user, prompt the user is what? You are not eligible to vote. Okay? Please, you must be 18 and above. Okay? Then let's see if the whole is true, if the condition is true, then it should alert what? Great. You are you are eligible to vote. Okay, you are eligible to vote. Now let's see what we have. Let's see what we have. If we have an error. So if we either one, you see, please you must be 18 and above. You see the question? If I cancel, you see, because it's not a number. But when I enter 19, great, you are eligible to vote. You see, this is another example of using the while loop. Okay, it's another example of using the what? The while loop. You see that we're able to check for two conditions. Number one condition is that the person must be above 18. Number two condition is that it must not be empty. It must not be empty. All right? It must not be empty. So these are practical examples of how to use what? A while loop and a for loop. Okay? Please, if you have any question, don't forget to drop a question in the comment section. If there's any area that is confusing to you, please. And also, please go back and watch previous videos so that you have understanding about all these operators we are using, these conditional statements that we are using. All right? Thank you for today's class. See you in our next class. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and share with your friends or your siblings that are willing to transition into tech and want to learn programming. Please share with them. Thank you. See you in our next class.